Hello, I am so happy to be with you today to talk about women empowerment and how they can contribute to sustainable infrastructure and sustainable PPPs. My name is Fatima Zoura Rahmoun, and I am at the Ministry of Economy and Finance in Morocco, and I am also an executive member of WAPPP. I've been contributed to PPP for more than 10 years now, and women has been in the center of my interest. So let me set the floor for this session by sharing a statement from the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, who stated that achieving women's equality is the unfinished business of our time and the greatest human rights challenge in our world. Women empowerment is key to reducing climate change after the COVID-19 pandemic. So the increase of climate risk has widened the global gap and laid bare the state of gender inequalities. 80% of people displaced by climate change are women. Women are not sufficiently represented in climate change talks, despite often being on the front line of the impacts of climate change. Gender equality is one of the UN SDGs created to achieve a better and more sustainable future for all. So, and if SDG 5 is not achieved, the outcome of all the goals will be compromised and also delayed. So, women are increasingly being recognized as the major stakeholders in climate action and impact conversations. So, investing in women's empowerment and their role is important to build global resilience to shocks and to shape more sustainable vision for the future of our planet. So, today's session will bring two leaders from She Changes and Infra Women Brazil to highlight such issues. We will also conduct 3 polls during the session to get the views of the audience. And of course, you are invited to contribute and ask questions through the chat or the Q&A or directly during the 10 or 15 last minutes of the session. So without further ado, let me briefly introduce our panelists, Elise Buckle from She Changes and Isadora Chansky-Cohen from Infra Women Brazil. And you can read more about them on the speaker area on Airmeet. So Elise Buckle has been working in the field of climate and sustainability for 20 years. She's the president and director of Climate and Sustainability. She's also the co-founder of She Changes Climate, an initiative focusing on human empowerment. Elise has worked as special advisor to several high-level diplomats, and she led several successful global campaigns. She grew and facilitated the Planetary Emergency Partnership, bringing together 300 and plus influential partners from around the world to call for a nature positive and climate neutral recovery after COVID-19. Isadora Cohen is the founding partner and CEO of ICO Consultria, private consulting firm for public-private integration. She's also the co-founder and president of Infra Women Brazil. She is a coordinator of the MBA in Infrastructure, PPPs, and concession of CDMG. She's also a former secretary of the Sao Paulo State Privatization Program and the head of the PPP unit of the same state. She's also a former partner of KPMG, head of the government practice in Brazil. Please join me welcoming Elise and Isadora. So, dear panelists, so let me request you to quickly tell us what your organization is doing to promote the women presence in the infrastructure sector. Let's start with Elise and then we can go to Isadora.
Thank you so much, Fatima, and congratulations for convening such an amazing event with many participants joining from around the world. It's a pleasure to be with all of you today. As you said, we are facing a planetary emergency right now, and this is a triple crisis for climate, for biodiversity, and for people. And what's happening right now is also because of the war in Ukraine. There are multiple impacts on food security. So climate change is impacting food production, but also now we have an increase in prices, which is impacting a lot of women around the world, in particular in Africa. And women are not just victims of climate change, although we know that 80% of climate refugees are women, that women are also more at risk when there is a natural disaster. But women are also the solutions multipliers. And this is what we're focusing on now with She Changes Climate. It's a platform of 400 women leaders from around the world. We started during COP26 because we realized that the UK presidency had not appointed any woman on their leadership team. We managed to get them to appoint some women. So at the end, there were about 40% of women on the presidency team. And now we're working with the COP27 presidency team, which is Egypt, because Egypt is going to host COP27. And we're asking them to have 50% of women at the very top for their team. Why is it important? Because we think that we can't solve the climate crisis if we don't have a 50-50 vision at the top. As women, we are 52% of the world population, and we also need to be part of the solutions in terms of defining our future, defining the future of the next generation. But it's also that it's more effective. There's a lot of research and data showing that when you have diversity at the top, you have better results. So this is also true for business. When you have 50% of women or more on boards, the companies perform better, and also they perform better in terms of their climate emissions. So this is also a very important issue in terms of being efficient. And you were asking more about infrastructures, where what is also important is to make sure that more finance is going to women in terms of decision making. If you look at the venture capitals in the US, only 2% is going to women. Most of it is actually the largest investments are being decided 98% by women. There are also very few bank CEOs. Only 2% of the large banks are led by women. So that means the people who decide on where we invest the money, what kind of infrastructures, this is also very much male dominated. And what we need now is to invest in a low carbon economy. So we need, instead of investing in fossil fuel infrastructures, in roads and oil production and natural gas and coal power plants, we need to invest massively in renewable energy. That's for the energy part. In terms of transport as well, we need to invest in public transport, in trains, also in bike lanes, in cities that are where it is easier to move around, also by foot. So that's also the infrastructures that we are deciding today that will really define our carbon footprint for the next few years. And according to the Paris Agreement, everybody knows that we need to be carbon neutral by 2050. The other thing is to invest in natural infrastructures. So investing in trees, in ecosystem restoration, this is also absolutely essential, because 1/3 of the carbon emissions we need to reduce to reach the objective of the Paris Agreement are based on nature-based solutions. And then, of course, these are all the kind of hard infrastructures, but of course, you also need to invest in education and health, because the more you invest in health and education, especially for children, the more you invest in a more resilient society for the future generations. So our model is of leadership, of family leadership, is Jacinda Ardern, who is the Prime Minister of New Zealand. She adopted a well-being budget for her economy, which is actually placing climate action, health, and education at the center of the economy. And that's what we would like to see for all countries around the world, to invest in a low carbon economy, but also an economy that really places the well-being of people and the well-being of future generations at the heart of its vision. Thank you.
Isadora?
Thank you, Fatma. First of all, I would like to thank you for the invitation for be part of such an important panel. And I admire your organization so much. And I believe that WAPPP can connect many countries and change for better, of course, the public services in the world. For me, it is a great honor to be here today, along with these women that I also admire so much. And congratulations for the organization and for making it possible. In a nutshell, InfraWomen Brazil is an organization that brings together more than 800 women working in infrastructure sectors, the most diverse sectors. So I'm talking about from ports, airports, oil production, energy and highways, to parks, health, education, and so on. We have now more than 20 industry leaders who conduct very in-depth discussions on how to develop infrastructure in Brazil, and especially in PPPs and concessions. We have women working both for the public and for the private sectors and in most diverse positions. And we act on policy-making processes, advocacy activities, promotion of important discussions for the sectors, and also, Fatima, we still have fun. So I think I'll have the opportunity to speak a little bit more of InfoWomen Brazil during this panel. So I think this is a brief comment on how do we work on InfoWomen Brazil.
Thank you, Isadora. Thank you, Elise, for this opening statement and the summary of work going on your organization. Perhaps for the rest of this panel, we can have like different questions for each one, and at the same time, we can pick up questions from the audience. But before, let me display the first poll with the main question, and you have 1 minute to go through it. It's an easily done just by clicking on one of the respondent bullet points. Here we go. So we can give you like 1 minute before we go to the next question. We can already see that around 80%, 75, 80% think that the climate change is a great deal in impacting women. So my first question is for Elise on climate change in women. So where are we now, and how is climate change impacting women? And are women participating enough in decision-making for the future of the Earth?
Where we are now, where I think we, as I said before, we need to be aware that we are facing a climate emergency right now. You know, this is not about 2050, it's about today. And as I said before, it's actually, there's now a connection of different crises that are coming together. And so there is a systemic issue now because we have a situation of a food crisis in many countries, in particular in Africa. And we know that women are the forefront of this crisis because women are the ones who are, who have to walk further and further to collect water or to collect wood to cook. And they are struggling to put food on the table. In Africa, it's more than 70% of women who are responsible for food production. And of course, also, you have an issue when women are breastfeeding because they don't have any more, their own health is at risk, and so they can't feed their children. And so this is leading to these situations where you have these images. I remember when I was at the G8 summit in France a while ago, when France had the presidency, we had these images from Sudan where you could see women actually who had to bury their children. And it's not possible to bear this situation. Today, in 2022, there were about 800 million people who were facing food insecurity about 20 years ago. And now, because of climate impacts, because of COVID-19, and because of the food crisis, the number had dropped down to 500 million, and now we're back to 800 million again. So this is a slow onset event. It's not always in the news. It's not as dramatic as other things you might see when you have a flood or a storm or even the war in Ukraine. But this has impact on people every day, and it's impacting women and children in particular. Now, we know that also, I'm talking a lot about Africa because COP27 is in Africa. So this is the COP of Africa, and Egypt has a big responsibility to make sure we catalyze finance to women to make some change, to increase resilience. We know that there are also some amazing women leaders in Africa who are developing nature-based solutions, who are producing food locally, who are developing community gardens, to make sure they produce food for their own communities and they don't rely on imports from Ukraine or Russia or other parts of the world. And so the challenge now is to make sure that these women have access to microcredits, to IT solutions, to scale up these nature-based solutions. And we've seen, for example, in Bangladesh with the Grameen Bank, that when you have microcredit schemes going to women, you have more than 90% of return of payoff. They usually pay off their microcredits. So this is also a very successful financial strategies. And that's something we're working on now with She Changes Climate, is we want to work with financial institutions to catalyze finance, to empower women in Africa in particular, to scale up these solutions. But we also want to make sure they have a voice. Because we think that as solutions multipliers, they need to be put under the spotlight. And I wish we had more African women here on the panel today. And that's something we want to do for COP27. We will convene a Women Leaders Climate Summit on November 8th online. All of you are invited. I'm sure that we can count on the World Association of Public-Private Partnership to share the invitation. It will be very open, very inclusive. And what we want to do is connect women who have more power and influence and finance with women who don't have a voice, in particular in Africa, because we feel that when you have also peer-to-peer coaching, that's when you can have more systemic impact, positive impact. So I hope that's answering part of your question. But of course, the other part of your question was, are women already included in decision making? And of course, not enough. If you look at the climate negotiations, only 35% of the delegations that were at the table at COP26 were headed by women. So it's about 1/3 of countries had a woman as a head of delegation. So that's a big challenge, because the parties to the UNFCCC process adopted the Lima work program on gender. So it was adopted by all countries, by 195 countries, and they haven't implemented this work program. So the UNFCCC is trying to do everything they can in terms of capacity building, in terms of encouraging countries to appoint a woman as head of delegation. But it's still mainly men around the table in terms of the negotiations on climate change. And then, as I said before, the COP27 presidency team of Egypt for now is mainly men. We have Minister Fouad, who's the Minister for Environment, who is a very talented diplomat, who is one of the coordinators and special envoy on climate. But we would like to see more women being appointed at the very top. And another idea we have is also to ask for a co-presidency. So I'm not sure we will get it for this time in Egypt. It's probably too late. But for COP28 in the UAE for next year in 2023, we would love to see a man and a woman as co-presidents of the COP. I think that would really set the examples for all the parties that are coming to the negotiation table, to always think about this 50-50 vision. And it's not about women against men, it's about men and women working together for a better future. So thank you, Fatima.
Thank you, Elise. Thank you. And I hope that we will get to the 50-50 representation that we've been talking about, and the co-presidency at COP28. Climate change presents one of the biggest threats to development, and it is widespread impact affects women. Isadora, do you think that investing in women will increase their resilience to climate change? And if yes, how?
Well, thank you, Fatima, for your question. I think there are many ways, and I'm glad that we can live in this age, times where we can be wherever we want to be. And there is so much power in diversity, right? Unfortunately, as Elise was talking about, we have an historical gap of gender equality. It is time to work so we can create a new reality where women worth just the same as men. And we are part and main actors and actresses of this transformation. In addition to what Elise said, and especially related to financing women, and in line to what she said about giving women more voice, one of the things that we can do in order to build women resilience is putting some light to the subject. And I agree totally with Elise when she tells us about what she's doing in her organization. And in our case, is being able to discuss in a very masculine sector why it is important to have women on board, and why it is important to have women leading the decision-making processes. And representation means a lot. If I see other women getting there where I thought it was impossible to go, I can work on fears and prepare my guts to dream and to achieve my dreams. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about Infra Women. I think it was a very important tool to call attention to the importance of having more women discussing infrastructure in Brazil. Infra Women Brazil, as I said before, is a non-profit association which promotes equality for women working in infrastructure sectors, especially in PPPs and concession. And we started after an episode of mansplaining and menstruating during an international congress in which only 3 women were participating among maybe 30 or more men. And after that, we started to ask ourselves and our colleagues, where are the other women in infrastructure? And we started to invite our friends and the friends of our friends. And after 2 years, we turned into an association of more than 800 women. Our first initiative to build women confidence and resilience was spreading the message that we weren't alone anymore. We were together in this journey, and if we were powerful on our own, we are much more potent as a team. And in order to encourage women to participate on forums and seminars, we made a campaign named Invite Her. We put together more than 100 CVs, women CVs, and made them public in the internet, and along with the question, why are those women not invited to sit on the table with men so they can talk about their point of view for infrastructure development? Of course, those women were so qualified and their CVs were so special that it was impossible to ignore our call. And after that, many women were invited. Many women came together and joined the Infrastructure Brazil organization. And many women started to discuss and to publish their opinion in a safer place within this protected net. We made a mentorship program, and we attracted the attention of men and women. And at some point, we no longer discuss why women should be part of the discussion. We only create the space and the conditions for women to talk about what they like and what they do, which is how can we do and how can we achieve better infrastructure and better development by better infrastructure conditions. So, Fatma, I think we should, of course, see how to increase resilience and women resilience due to climate change and everything. So investing in women will increase, as Elise was saying, and will increase the resilience to climate change. And this is very related to development of better infrastructure and better PPP projects. Climate change affects women in many conditions. Let me take health and sanitation as examples. In Brazil, the lack of sanitation proportionally affects the well-being of women more than they affect men. According to a study made by an institute really well recognized in Brazil, women are more prone to disease linked to lack of sanitation than men. For every 1,000 women, 76 were removed from their activities due to diarrhea and vomiting, and directly impacting the number of hospital admissions and health expenditures in state and municipalities. Women without basic sanitation infrastructure are more subject to school delays than men in the same conditions. They have an average delay of 6 months compared to men in the same conditions. This is also reflected on lower scores, and the number of women in water deficit reached more than 27 million in 2016, and they are increasing. And this indicates that 1 in 4 women either did not have access to treated water or did not receive water regularly, related to what Elise were talking to us right before. And women's menstrual health is intrinsically linked to access to toilet and sanitation networks. And there is a lot of data related to how women are impacted by the lack of sanitation and due to climate changes as well. It is estimated that the number of women living below the poverty line would increase from 21 million to 23 million, thanks to universal access to sanitation and also to climate changes in Brazil. In the public health sector, women tend to have a more humanized view of the treatment and care of patients. Women are more prone to diseases that depend on good infrastructure and hospital follow-up, such as breast cancer and cervical cancer, are diseases that women are proportionally more affected than men, such as depression, multiple sclerosis, and lupus. Women are largely responsible for the care of elderly relatives who are dependent on special cares. Illness such as CVAs, disabled activities, and self-care activities that often performed by women in the families. An adequate hospital infrastructure can reduce these changes as well. So as we see, Fatima, women are more likely to suffer from conditions that impact their health due to climate change, and to take care of those who are suffering from those conditions as well. And in this sense, it is particularly important to focus on projects that offer better conditions for women and diminish disparity among men and women. I think this would be my participation for your question.
Thank you, Isadora. Thank you so much for all this clarification. And before we go to the next round of questions, let me publish the second poll. So, and the second question is, are women participating enough in decision-making of sustainable infrastructure? Please take 30 seconds or a minute to answer the question. As we can see, like 87 to 90% answered no, that the participation of women in decision-making of sustainable infrastructure is not enough. So my next question is for Elise. Where do we want to go, and why is it important to have women at the table? And how a more equal participation would shape a more sustainable vision for the future?
Thank you, Fatima. And I will actually start answering your questions by talking about peace, because I think if you talk about sustainable infrastructures, well, the first thing is to make sure you don't have a war that's destroying all of these public infrastructures. And so, so this is another element which you will find. I shared there a link to She Changes Climate Brief with key facts and figures on women's participation in decision-making in climate negotiations, but also in peace negotiations. What we see now is about 90% of the Ukrainian refugees are women and children. But if you look at the pictures you see on the news, on BBC News, in terms of peace talks, you see only men around the table. And here again, the World Economic Forum has done an amazing study on peace negotiations. When you have women at the table of peace negotiations, and you negotiate a truce, this truce has 64% chance of lasting when you have women around the table. But yet, if you look at the figures, you have only about 13% of peace negotiators that are women. This is an average for 1992 to 2019, and only 6% of peace mediators were women. So this is also something we're asking for. We want more women as part of peace negotiations as a basis for the development of countries and for safeguarding public infrastructures in particular. In terms of climate, I think I've given some figures already of the climate negotiations. Where we want to go now, as I said, is we have a dialogue, a very good dialogue now with Dr. Mahmoud Mohildin, who I think is also on your panel, the high-level climate champion for Egypt. He's very supportive of women empowerment. So we're working with Egypt to set up a Friends of the Champions group with women leaders from the MENA region to advise them on how we can make COP27 more diverse and more inclusive. Of course, we would like countries to appoint more women as heads of delegations, as I said before. The other thing is also to have more women in politics, because the heads of states, for example, are the ones who are appointing the COP president each year. And only 10 countries around the world right now have a woman as a head of state. So this is also about supporting women who are running for elections, but also when they are elected, to support them. What is also interesting is if you look at the few women who are heads of states, I talked about Jacinda Ardern, but you can look at Nicola Sturgeon, at other heads of states in Scotland, Norway, and Iceland. These are the women who have a vision for the future, where you really put the well-being economy at the center of budgeting. So that's also interesting, and it's also up to the citizens to when we vote, to vote for candidates who are going to advocate for a safer future, for climate action, and also to vote for women. What's interesting is actually, if you look at the number of women you have in parliaments, it's not necessarily Switzerland that's the best candidate. Rwanda, the country of Rwanda, has 65% of women in the parliament. But often it doesn't happen like that. Often it's also because countries are setting up quotas and are saying, okay, we want at least 50% of the members of parliament to be women. And this is also why at the level of the European Union, you have about a bit more than 50% of women that are sitting at the European Parliament. So I don't think it will happen easily. I think you need a lot of support, and you need also legislation to make the 50-50 vision happen at all levels, in the UNFCCC negotiations, in politics, and also in companies. As I said before, on the board of companies, you can have a lot of pressure from stakeholders, from shareholders as well, who are investing their money Now, there are some shareholders who only invest in companies that have more than 50% on the board, not just because it looks good, but because these companies perform better. So I think there are multiple levers of change, finance, legislations with quotas, and of course, citizens' mobilization as well.
Thank you, Elise. And because we don't have much time, I already published the last poll, so attendees can answer it. And I'll have one last question for Elise and Isadora. Please take 2 to 3 minutes to answer that question. What are some of the practical solutions for women to become solution multipliers? And how do we get there? And how women empowerment is important? We can start with Isadora.
Thank you, Fatma. Let's take the example of Brazil. Today, it would be the country with the largest PPP portfolio in the world. Many billions of dollars invested through this partnership since the 90s, and especially in recent years, with a huge emphasis on this hiring model. Even so, it is rare for women to lead important positions in the world of infrastructure. A study published by our stock exchange showed that 61% of public traded companies, Brazilian companies, do not have women among statutory executives. And in addition, Infra Women Brazil and WAPPP, an organization, Women on Board organization, jointly made a study by means of which we conclude that only 12% of the positions of those companies' boards are occupied by women. Same participation of women in our parliament, by the way. And Brazil occupies the 132nd place in the World Economic Forum ranking in the list of 149 nations on pay equity for similar work, formulated in 2018. And a study by the Institute of Applied Economic Research pointed out that disparity between men and women in the public sector are huge. Women reached the level of 59% of the federal employees, but earn on average almost 30% less than men. It is necessary to monitor management positions and the average remuneration of Black women as well. There is some good news. In recent years, however, Brazil, the topic of gender has gained more strength in PPP scenarios in Brazil. And we have 26 states, a very unique regime of autonomy in Brazil, and many states are responsible for coordinating PPPs projects. In these states, it is common to see PPP units which are responsible for structuring the projects, designing the projects, and managing these projects. And it is interesting to note that many of these units in Brazil are headed by women. São Paulo is an example of that. Mato Grosso do Sul, Piauí, Minas Gerais are good examples of women in leadership positions. Although these women do not occupy top executive positions, they are very competent leaders in this context of PPPs. Even at the federal level, in the last 2 years, we had a woman, Marta Cellier, coordinating the entire federal partnership projects in Brazil. We are in transformation, and I think that this team will never be left aside. Once you see it, you cannot unsee it, right? So there is indeed a long way to go, but we are making a great revolution, I believe. And when it comes to solution, I think PPP is a tool for conducting public policies. They are ways of providing a public service of interest to society. The users of these policies are diverse individuals. Society is plural, and being plural, the decision-making process must be attentive to everything that concerns to particularities of the beneficiaries of that society. Public service are intended for Black people, disabled people, women, gay community, old people, children. PPPs must be increasingly aimed at serving as a mechanism to reduce inequality through well-provided services designed to provide decent conditions and efficient infrastructure so that people can develop. In this context, for example, it makes perfect sense for concessionaires and decision-making layers of government to bring women together and on top positions. It was in this context that InfraWomen Brazil created an index of gender equality in companies and government. PPPs are relatively flexible arrangements, so it is possible to accommodate ESG objectives in contracts for the provision of any infrastructure and services. Just keep an eye on it, on the government and on the private sector. And we believe that to have this careful look, it is necessary that public and private managers are legitimate representative of this diversity. So with this index, the idea is to measure how companies and governments would be prepared to develop this view of inclusion for public policy. The index starts by measuring whether the company has a diagnosis, a census of the positions that are held by women within the organization, for the lowest hierarchical to highest positions. After that, we focus on policies for hiring people. So in the next step, we assess whether the company has policies for contracting with third parties. And the next step is to assess whether the company works for train the people hired so they can develop and ascend to highest positions. For women, it is important as well that the company and the government have talent retention policies. And the next analysis is about the promotion policies. Does the company have...
Doras, thank you so much. So interesting to hear all these things from Infra Brazil, but we need to take some questions from the audience. So I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I'm going to give the floor to Elise. Elise, please, you have 2-3 minutes because we have some questions and we want also to bring Ziad to the floor with us. Thank you.
Yes, okay. Very quickly, I'm going to talk about 4 elements that are key to make a change. Girls' education, mentoring and lifelong learning, and legislations, and finance and business. So the first one is girls' education. What is interesting with girls' education is that it's not just a key for women empowerment, it's actually also a very important climate solutions. Maybe you know about Project Drawdown. They basically listed all the climate solutions and they tried to rate them according to how efficient these measures were. And actually, girls' education was in the top 3 solutions, much higher than nuclear power, for example, which was number 20 or 21, which is a technological solution. But actually, when you have girls' education, of course, obviously, you also give the power to these women to go to school, to go to university, but also to decide how many children they want, when do they want to have children, and you give them the ability to have a much more important role in terms of joining companies, joining governments, and having access to decision-making power. I think that's the number one. It's very simple, very common sense, but we tend to forget about it. The second one is that it's not only about going to school when you are young, it's also about learning during your life. And I think that something we are doing as She Changes Climate is a mentoring program, and peer-to-peer coaching is also super important for women to build confidence, to help each other, for the ones who have already build a career, how you can help more junior professionals. And that's actually something I'm really passionate about. I always mentor more junior women who want to go into the space of climate action and don't know where to go. That's the second one. The third one, as said before, is government legislations. Things are not changing unless you have really strong legislations in place. One of them I talked about is having quotas for parliaments. But there are, of course, many things to do to make sure also that you have some of these jobs that are dominated by women, for example, healthcare. We know that during COVID-19, nurses have been working so hard and their work is never well recognized. They always get a lower pay. And actually, when you invest in the well-being, in the health economy, you create value for people, and this is usually lower carbon footprint as well. So instead of putting your money into oil infrastructures, put it into health and education. And then the fourth one is finance and business. I talked about having 50% of women on boards of companies. For example, now we have a climate lens. When we invest, nobody wants to invest in oil and gas and coal anymore, where we should also have a gender lens. And I think the shareholders have an important role to play, but investors have a role to play. As I said before, it's not only about a principle of ethics, it's also a principle of efficiency. And I think the shareholders should also say, okay, we want to invest in women because we know that we will increase the performance of the companies or the sectors where we are investing. So I hope that's answering your questions, these 4 elements. Thank you, Fatima.
Thank you, Elise. Thank you, Elise and Isadora, for this enriching discussion on how to empower women and on the work done by She Changes and also in Brazil. So I'm going to pick the first question. Dear distinguished guests and speakers, thank you for this opportunity. My question is related to social stereotypes which can block women's empowerment in climate change mitigation programs and projects. How do you overcome them?
I give a quick answer to that, but it's not so easy to answer. But I think that the stereotypes also start with ourselves. What is our vision of our role in society? And I think that sometimes as women we have a self-limiting vision, and I think that's very important to go. Of course, you have stereotypes that are in society, but you have stereotypes that are also in your own vision of what you can do or what you cannot do in your life. So I think I would start with your own self-limiting thoughts sometimes. I think you start small with yourself. You start with your family, with your communities. If you are a mother, it's also about how you educate your children. I have, a boy and a girl, and I always think about, okay, what is it? I'm always asking my boy to help with different tasks in the house, and I push my girl to do sports that maybe she would not think about. And of course, it's also about our partners, our husbands. I think sometimes as women, we think that we need to do everything ourselves. I'm talking here as a mother, but when you have children, you think you're the only one who can get everything done, that your husband is not good enough to do the work. So I think it's also about empowering other people around you to share the task. And that's maybe a very personal answer, but going beyond the stereotypes starts with yourself, with your family, and with your community.
Thank you, Elise. And because we don't have much time left, I'm giving the floor to Ziad if he wants to say something.
Thank you, Fatima. Thank you, Elise. Thank you, Isadora. Wonderful of you to have joined us, and thank you very much. Really great points you made. And Elise, you in your last comments, you basically covered the things that I thought were missing from the earlier part, and I wanted to, I thought would be good to highlight as well. It is all good to ask for women to be in top decision-making positions, and all for that. But we need to make sure that they're prepared, that they're ready, that they have the education. It starts early on. that they are involved in finance, that they are involved in construction, that of course there are women qualified that can take the top positions, but they need to be in large numbers so that they can really sort of get there through the competitive process, not just through the appointment process, for it to have an impact and be credible. So we, I mean, at WAPP, we are really conscious of this. We're doing all we can. We have a young PPP professionals chapter to which we encourage women to join and develop their PPP skills early on. We have a women chapter headed by Fatima, and you know, we're active in promoting all the matters of involvement in top decision making and all the things that you mentioned. We have signed an MOU with Infra Women Brazil because we really believe in what they are doing. What we thought was fantastic is that they've taken it to a rank and file, having 800 women be members of their association means that they are reaching through all the levels of the organizations and decision making. And we would like to see this become international. So we are going to do all our best to take Infra Women, instead of it being Infra Women Brazil, be Infra Women International. So this is one of our plans for the coming few months. I want to mention something about equal pay, because equal pay does remain to be an issue, whether it is, you know, PPP and infrastructure is no different from other industries, and it is important to make sure that women get equal pay for equal work. And the last thing I want to mention is that women-led minority businesses. So this is something that we in the PPP community, especially those of members of our community who are in the public sector in government, when they are designing tenders, they may be, you know, always looking for the large companies, which is fine, but they can include in their tenders some requirements that these large companies do subcontract some of the work to women-led businesses, so we can let women entrepreneurs develop their business capabilities and companies, and eventually be able to compete with the big guys. So I think this is, you know, there's a lot of work for all of us ahead, but the journey of 1,000 miles starts with one step. So we have to work on it. Thank you, Fatima.
Thank you, Ziad. Thank you, Ziad. Thank you again to our panelists, and thank you to our audience. And I think it's time to close and to go to the next session. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.